But also to just say that today's programme really reflects what an exciting year it's been. From work on individual species to increasing numbers of rare moths now being monitored to extra research in progress. Through our strategy, we've secured a major donation towards our research work. The Heather Corrie Lepidoptera Research Fund has enabled us to recruit Lisbeth Hordley as our first postdoc researcher. And as well as her work on cool adapted moths, she's also exploring further research to help understand the decline in moorland moths. The first Dorset Award in memory of Douglas Boys was made to Rochelle Kennedy for her PhD project on the impact of mob grazing on moth larvae. And I'd really like to say a thank you to everybody that contributed towards that fund. And just to let you know that if you haven't done, you've still got an opportunity, as the donation page on the Butterfly Conservation website is still open if you till the end of next week, if you'd like to contribute to that. We're also expanding our ecology team with a new head of ecology and a new North of England ecologist in post, Ryan Clark. This has been made possible thanks to an increase in funding from Natural England. And these appointments are really there to help support the excellent work being done by our conservation staff, partners and volunteers in delivering the Threatened Species programme. And further afield, we're also partners in the with the International Union for Conservation of Nature in developing a new European moth red list, and we're hoping that this will be released in 2024. The Supporting Science project that I know many of you are aware of, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. They keep getting that department's name longer and longer. But this has seen training courses delivered this year through the Field Studies Council and has included ID training, and with some of the trainees going on to do verification training as well, so that they can help county recorders. But first, a couple of requests from me. You will soon see in the chat box there's an evaluation form. Please could you fill that out before the end of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, because we're really keen to get your feedback. As you'll have seen from the holding slide, which will also appear in the coffee break, if you are able to make a donation towards the costs of running recorder events like this, instructions are on the holding slide. So finally, I'd just like to say a big thank you for all of you for joining us today, for all the moth recording and conservation work that you do. And I'm looking forward to this exciting programme. And now I'm going to hand you over to Richard Fox, who's going to chair today's meeting.
Thank you very much, Russell. Morning, everyone. Great to see so many people here already. I'm sure there'll be a few more trickling in as people get into the swing, get their cup of coffee or tea ready and sit down to enjoy a fantastic morning of talks about moths, moth ecology, moth conservation and moth recording. So we'll just a couple of housekeeping things about how to interact with the meeting today. If you have questions for speakers, assuming that there's time after they've given their talks, then please use the Q&A box. So if you look down at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a little Q&A box. So that's where you can post questions for speakers, and I will keep tabs on that box and pose those questions to speakers on your behalf, assuming that there's time. There's also the chat box next to that, down at the bottom of your window, which is the place for just a general chat. So as Russell's just mentioned, the survey about how you found this morning's meeting is in there, the link to that survey, and that's also a place where you can just chat more informally. So it'd be great to hear where people are joining us from this morning in the chat, that kind of thing. Any sort of more general questions or comments can go in the chat box. So we're going to start, as we always do, the UK Moth Recorders Meeting. I'm sure many of you will have attended a number of them over the years, both in person in Birmingham and online. with a roundup of our moth recording work, particularly around the National Moth Recording Scheme by Zoe Randle. So you are there, Zoe, I see you. Would you like to give us a summary of all the wonderful recording work that's been going on?
Well, good morning. Apart from a few technical hitches this morning, stress levels are quite high, but I will give you an update on the National Moth Recording Scheme. I'm Zoe Randle and I'm the Senior Surveys Officer at Butterfly Conservation. So first of all, I will tell you the status of data sets in the National Moth Recording Scheme. We'll start with macro moth data sets. The map here shows you the status and where we're at with received data sets. These aren't necessarily ones that Les has processed and put in the NMRS as yet. You see there's quite a few outstanding data sets for 2022. That's not surprising, as county recorders are currently very busy collating and verifying those records, and we expect to receive them in the next couple of months. The areas that are of more concern are the red and the orange areas, where we've got data from 2019 to 2022 outstanding and 2020 to 2022 outstanding. So yeah, we're really keen to get the National Moth Recording Scheme up to date, so the data is up to date and ready and able to be used by conservation partners, as well as butterfly conservation staff and scientific researchers. So if there are any county recorders out there struggling with their getting their data sets to us, please let us know and we'll see what we can do to help you out. We've got one up-to-date data set that includes 2022 data, and that's Vice County 84 West Lothian. So well done, Mark Cubitt. So we've got nearly 33 million verified moth records of macro moth records in the national scheme, and just over 740,000 of those are new since March 2022. Moving on to micro moth data sets that we've received, it's much more mixed picture. You can see that there's some places where we've not received any micro moth records at all, and there's serious backlogs in several places. But again, you know, it's not really surprising. Micro moth verification is quite tricky. So, and I'm sure that the county recorders are working on these micro moth data sets to get them shipshape ready for submission to the national scheme. Again, please do let us know if you're, experiencing serious problems and delays, and we can, step in and see what we can do to help you. So in terms of micro moth records, we've got 5.5 million verified micro moth records, and just almost 430,000 of them are new since March 2022. And we're developing a micro moth verification project looking at butterfly conservation's priority and threatened moth species. So that's a really big step in, getting micro moth data verified, ready for future use, and particularly use for butterfly conservation's strategy. So in total, we've got 38.4 million verified moth records in the National Moth Recording Scheme database, and it's probably one of the largest databases in the world for insects, I'd say. So that's really great. So thank you to all of the recorders that are out there that have been submitting their records to their county recorders for verification and collation, and an absolutely massive thanks to the County Moth Recorder Network and their assistants for doing this vital work in getting the data to the national scheme. We really couldn't do what we do without your efforts and hard work. So last year, 2022, was a really, really good year for migrants from early accounts. And there were many species that were new to Britain last year, including this Pseudozaba bipartita. There were 2 records of this moth, one in Hampshire on the 25th of October and one in North Essex on the 29th of October. And this particular photograph of this lovely little moth is from Daniel Blyton. He found the 2nd record of it, and you can read all about his exciting discovery in the November edition of eMoth. So the Clifton nonpareil seemed to do really well last year as well, and there was a real buzz on social media about this beautiful moth, which is absolutely stonking and really quite a large one. I've never seen, well, I've not caught one myself as yet, but maybe one day I will do. And you can see here we've got the distribution map for the Clifton on the left-hand side from the Atlas of Britain and Ireland's larger moths. And the map on the right-hand side shows the records that have come into on the iRecord system for this moth. So all the orange dots are records from 2017 to 2023. And you can see that, the moth really does seem to be expanding its range here, northwards and westwards. Obviously, not all of these. Some of these will be resident populations if they're close to known colonies, and some of them will be migrants. And I think we can probably safely say that these two up here in Scotland are these two sightings in 2022 are probably migrant moths. Again, I had to look at iRecord data to give you up-to-date figures on the status of some other migrant moth species. I'd love to be reporting on live data from the National Moth Recording Scheme, but due to the time lags in getting the data in and getting it processed, I'm unable to, but maybe in one day we'll be in that position. But you can see here quite clearly that all three of these species, the hummingbird hawk moth, the striped hawk moth and the crimson speckled, have had vastly greater numbers of records in 2022 than in previous years. And indeed our very own Richard Fox had his first crimson speckled records down in Devon this summer or this autumn, and he was really excited. So I had a bit of an epiphany a few weeks ago, and I just thought, oh, imagine a vision of the future where I'm able to sit at this meeting and my colleagues and our conservation partners are able to report on and interrogate live verified data. And the power of the National Moth Recording Scheme, combined with iRecord data that's fully amalgamated and integrated, would just be absolutely phenomenal. It'd be like the National Moth Recording Scheme on steroids, and that's a vision that I'm really looking forward to reaching fruition. And also county recorders having less labour intensive roles. The number of people recording and number of records coming in every year is increasing year on year, and county recorders really are struggling to keep up with the popularity of moths. And so we're working towards all of these goals by making improvements to iRecord, by training volunteers in verification. We've got county recorders that are mentoring recorders for succession planning, and we're introducing simpler, smoother, faster data flows. One thing that we've managed to achieve in terms of speeding up data flows is setting up a new National Moth Recording Scheme online data portal. It's linked to iRecord, so county recorders have got instant access to those records to verify as soon as they come in. And so far, it seems to have been a great success. So the new National Moth Recording Scheme data portal was only launched a year ago. So far, we've got over 1,600 registered users, and there's over 350,000 records there already. So just to give you a comparison on how the old system was operating, we had only had 234,973 records in that system, which ran for just over a decade, although we did have just nearly 7,000 users. So the new system better supports recorders to provide better quality data to county moth recorders, and also its smooth data flows. So as I said, our data flows are becoming much simpler. All of butterfly conservation surveys, with the exception of the big butterfly count, are now routed through iRecord, so the records are there instantly for county recorders to access. And part of our supporting science project, which is funded by the Heritage Fund from the lottery and supported by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, we are making improvements to iRecord, to the verification process in iRecord to make it easier for county recorders. We're also developing a county recorder lookup tool, and we've been involved in future data skills to upskill recorders out there. And we've been running identification training and verification training. So one of the identification training courses we ran was in identifying distinctive moths from photographs. There were 12 target species, and here you can see them here. And I think you'll agree that they are all relatively striking and distinctive and easy even for beginners to start to verify from photographs. We ran a similar course for identifying distinctive butterflies, and the two courses combined attracted over 1,500 participants. So, I mean, that's absolutely amazing. And apparently it's the most well attended courses, online courses run by the Field Studies Council or in partnership with them. So that's absolutely phenomenal. The distinctive species training courses were advertised via our normal routes amongst branches and butterfly conservation branches and our membership and everything, but we also were able to reach out and reach them via the Field Studies Council and various other means. So I think that's what helped us get these 1,500 people in, many of which were new to the butterfly conservation networks. So how the training worked was initially we ran Discovering iRecord course with the Field Studies Council. And then, as I've said, we had our Identifying Distinctive Moths training course. And then many people then went on to do a verification in iRecord training. So this is identifying distinctive species from photographs in iRecord. And again, really well attended. 80 people attended the Discovering iRecord course. 842 people did the Identifying Distinctive Moths, only 730 butterflies, I must add. And 29 people did the verification in iRecord course, and 25 of these people were completely new to our networks. We had no contact with them previously, and it does seem that there's appetite for further verification in iRecord training courses, as 157 people applied to do it. So there is scope there to run these courses again and get more people helping county recorders to verify records in iRecord with photographs. And then obviously these people will start with the simple species, but as their knowledge base and their skills grow, and with mentoring from the county recorders, they can really help in the longer term and increase their knowledge and verify more and more records as time goes on, which is what we need, because the number of records coming in is growing every year. So what's this led to? Well, this has led to us having 6 verification assistants placed with county moth recorders. We've had 11 verification assistants placed with county butterfly recorders, and we've got 3 verification assistants yet to be placed, 2 for moths and 1 for butterflies. And what's really interesting is that 86% of the verification assistants that we've brought through this are women. And again, all of them are new to the network. So all this is really great, and it's helping us to improve data flows and get the data moving. And then all of this data then can be used, it can be mobilized, so we can use the National Moth Recording Scheme data much more widely outside of butterfly conservation. One example is for scientific research. And we had a paper published last year in Global Change Biology. It was a collaboration between the University of Liverpool, Butterfly Conservation, Rothamsted Research, and the University of Reading. And the paper was entitled, "Where and Why Are Species Range Shifts Hampered by Unsuitable Landscapes?" The National Moth Recording Scheme data were used in this study, as were Rothamsted Insect Survey data. Now, the paper itself is quite complicated and takes quite a lot to get your head round, but I will just give you a very brief summary of what it's all about. So we already know that moths and butterflies are expanding their range due to climate change. Habitat availability is limiting their spread. They can't move northwards if there isn't anywhere for them to go. But this new research shows us that it's the position of those habitats within the landscape that's important. And so computer models were generated to look at the spread northwards of the range expansion of these moths due to climate change. And these models were tested against real life National Moth Recording Scheme and Rothamsted Insect Survey data. And what we found was that the two correlate. So we can be confident that the models are correct. And so we can trust these models and use them in conservation. So the models can be used to maximise the impact of conservation action and habitat restoration by targeting these environmental enhancements in the right places. So we can, if you like, we can improve connectivity by building these moth motorways, these habitat, these corridors and moth motorways, restoring habitats across the landscape, and that will increase the resilience of species to climate change. So, that's got really good wide-ranging practical applications, which in this time of biodiversity crisis, we really need, to be, stepping up our game and doing restoration where it's needed most to protect species. Another project that the National Moth Recording Scheme data has been used in is the DECIDE project. So basically, this is square bashing for the 21st century at a fine scale. And the idea is to show recorders where to go to collect data where it's needed most to improve species distribution models for use by conservationists, land managers, planners, and policymakers. So I'll just give you a little rundown of this, because species distribution models are being used more and more widely in our field, because we don't have the fine enough scale. Despite the amount of recording that's going on, there's not enough fine scale data out there for using. So this map on the right here shows you the DECIDE map, and you click on an area, and I've highlighted a national nature reserve in Hampshire. And the map here shows the recording priority for butterflies. So the purpley areas are low priority for recording butterflies. It's really well recorded there. The yellower areas are places where records are needed most to improve these models. If we look at exactly the same spot for day-flying moths, you can see that although people are out there recording butterflies, there's an awful lot of recording needed for day-flying moths in this area. There's a lot more yellow within this circle, this radius. And if we look at nighttime flying moths, again, you can see, really bright yellow areas there for recording moths. And excuse me, the other thing the tool can do is where you can click on the Get Suggestions button up here, and it will put little pins in the map and give you ideas of where to go. And when you click on a pin, it gives you information about that particular spot. So you can see here that the recording priority is very high. The model predicts there should be about 284 species there. The site is accessible, the habitat is grassland and arable land, and there's nearby access such as open access land, bridleways and footpaths. So if anyone's looking, if your New Year's resolution is to get out trapping in different places or record day flying moths in different places, then this DECIDE tool is perhaps something for you to check out and look at to plan your recording activities over the course of the year. And you've got the option here as well to change the month as well, so you can do it on a month by month basis. So Another part of the Decide project, the Decide projects have come to a close now. One of the things that we wanted to do in this was to do an arts and science collaboration to engage a much wider audience in biological recording. So a lighting installation was created by Bryony Benj Abbott, and Thomas Sharp was a poet, and he wrote a poetic narrative. So basically in December last year at Orleans House in Twickenham, we went along these little beautifully painted glass cocoon caskets were dotted around a woodland, and you could go along there, see the beautiful glass caskets, plug into your headphones and listen to the lovely narrative while you were admiring the installation. And we've had absolutely amazing feedback, and so many people came along to that and had no idea about biological recording, but had a fantastically immersive experience. And again, we reached audiences that we wouldn't traditionally reach. And I think there might be plans to maybe do a road show of the data sets. The thing was called the data sets dream. A data set has come to life and it's starting to dream about butterflies and moths and big data and our relationship with that. So hopefully it will go on a road show, so there'll be more opportunities to see that in future. So I guess the main thing here to tell you is that it doesn't matter if you're a casual recorder or a real hardcore recorder, whatever you're doing out there recording moths, all of your records, by submitting them to your county recorder and then county recorder checking them, verifying them, sending them to the national scheme, all of that data informs all of the work that we do. So be that single species habitat conservation, landscape scale conservation, advice to landowners, so small hilltop farmers or highways agencies and local authorities. The data are used also in scientific research. We can produce distribution trends and population trends and contribute to red lists. We can produce atlases, state of reports, and also use the data to engage audiences and do outreach work. And Emma Pestridge will be telling you shortly about the fantastic Kent's Magnificent Moths project that they've been running over the last few years. So I think I'm probably running out of time, which is always usual for me. So it's now just time for me to say thank you all for coming today. Thank you for listening. Huge thanks to the County Moth Recorders for all that they do and their verification assistants, the recording community as a whole, our partners, conservationists, researchers, funders, supporters, and the photographers whose images I've used in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Excellent. Wow, there was a lot of information packed in there. I'm glad this is being recorded. What we're trying to keep up with all of that and keep an eye on the Q&A box. So I definitely need to watch all that again to take it all in. But well done. You've beautifully filled your time slot. So we are busy dealing with questions that arose within the Q&A box, so everyone will get an answer, and people will be able to see the answers there rather than yeah, go on.
Just quickly, the links that I had in my talk, I'll copy them into the chat so everyone can check them out at their leisure. Okay, thanks.
Great, that's great. Okay, so as Zoe just trailed, our next talk is moving from recording into conservation of some of our rarest moths with a major butterfly conservation led project that's been going on in Kent for a little while now. So I invite my colleague Emma Pestridge to
Hey, yeah.
Are you there, Emma? Yes, you are. Yes,
there.
Great. All right, I'll hand over to you. Welcome.
I will share my screen. Here we go. I think you can all see that. It's telling me you can see it. Perfect.
Not yet for me, but
see that? It says you can see it. Come on.
I'm not. Is anyone else seeing it? I'm just seeing. Oh, hold on, it's coming.
That.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
There you go. Great. So, hi, I'm Emma, as I've been introduced. So I'm the engagement officer on this project. So it's the Kent's Magnificent Moths project that Butterfly Conservation is leading. It's running up to March 2024, and it is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So it's one of the largest area-specific conservation projects, moth conservation projects that Butterfly Conservation has undertaken. And it's got its mission of shining spotlight on rare and often misunderstood moths. So I'm working a lot with the general public and stuff just to kind of make them realise, well, how great moths are. So we're recording the management for these 8 priority species that you can see on the top here, and raising awareness within the communities and local schools of just how important and special it is to be supporting these species that are found on your doorstep. So 8, half of these, here you go, the ones that are in red now, are legally protected from disturbance. So we've been working with the public to find those who's interested in helping us survey these moths, often not using light drive, often using other ways, trying to do stuff in the day as well to make it as accessible as possible. So all of these, all of these moths have restricted ranges, so they are all priority moths in the UK kind of moth priority species list that BC have created. So in Kent, our threatened species are spread across priority landscapes. So we've got shingle beeches for the fiery clearwing moth and an ancient woodland for the white-spotted sable. The Dover and Folkestone cliffs and the chalk grasslands are a very busy hotspot. Here we go, with a very busy map that just shows that moths do outweigh butterflies. So it shows 15 threatened species there, which is one of the important messages that the project is trying to convey in the community, that these landscapes can house so many different species. So an extra pair of eyes looking out for these rare moths during their habitats through the daytime, rather than exclusively at night, has helped discover an exceptional number of new breeding sites for the fiery clearwing, the moth just on the left here. We've increased the number of areas the black-veined moth are known to breed in, and we've improved the number of sightings for the small yet stunning Anina funebris, which is the white-spotted sable moth, which we have been using the common name to make it as more accessible as possible for the general public, because we found, chatting to people, that using the kind of Latin names can make it quite daunting for some people. So here in Kent, we hold the UK's last remaining black-veined moth population. After the 20th century saw colonies lost from Dorset, Somerset, Essex, and 4 other locations in Kent. So it just left 3 Kent fields in the late 1990s. So at White Nature Reserve, which is just at the bottom here, where I have just circled, it's been the stronghold and contains 2 of these metapopulations. The moths were thought to be breeding in 4 areas of the reserve, but we have now seen egg-laying females in a further 2 areas of the site this year, as habitat suitability continues to improve, and we're working with organisations to continue that. So the other metapopulations are mostly on privately owned sites, and they consist of a few different chalk grasslands fields that are habitat restoration supported through a Natural England project. So they now hold populations of the moth that weren't there 20 years ago. So our UK population is restricted due to the specialist requirements that their mainland, more specialist requirements than their mainland European relatives. So they make it hard for themselves. They choose to lay their eggs on stems of coarse grass, which tend to outcompete the chalk grassland wildflowers that the larvae need to utilise. So these sites do need some active management to remain suitable for year upon year. So it can make it pretty tricky. So the frequency of adult sightings have been increasing since the project, and we hope to keep continuing that. But to confirm where those relatively mobile adults are actually breeding, we do need to find the larvae. And the larvae are a very camouflaged, tiny little caterpillar that obviously can be very hard to find. So we trialled this. So the black-veined moth larvae hadn't been recorded for over a decade, but at the end of April last year, 10 volunteers came out with us on a little nocturnal search with torches to trial locating them in the first known area within Wye Nature Reserve. And we were successful. But as you can see from our little photo, they are very camouflaged, which means at night time, they're very easily missed when they're sat on a dead grass stem. So this year, we'll be trialling sweep netting through the grasslands during a more sociable daytime hour as a different method, in hope that we will lead to an increased number of larvae encountered on our search and a more easily deployed method that we can put across the other breeding areas. So our volunteers have been absolutely instrumental through the success of this project so far. We're just pretty much nearly 2 years into our 3-year project. So last year, 83 volunteers planted out 1,506 caterpillar food plants to help 4 of the project's priority moths. And this is a variety of habitat sites where the main threat for these moths is a decreased availability of the plants their caterpillar will feed upon. These have been grown through a combined effort of over 200 volunteers. And we've managed to link up existing volunteer groups in the landscape with local community groups, local plant nurseries that haven't been visiting the local nature reserve previously. So it's a really good collaboration project, and we've seen some really good success from this. So by far, the most interest in habitat creation across the landscape has been for the marshmallow moth, probably because the plant is lovely, it's got a nice pink flower, and people quite like to grow it. And if it's in their garden, then that's pretty good for them. So this moth is probably one of the strongest contenders for the rarest macro moth our project is working on. So their largest population nationally is currently in Romney Marsh. This moth is confirmed, the moth's confirmed breeding sites are mostly in East Sussex. So with just one confirmed site across the border into Kent in the Romney Marsh area. So our focus site for this moth is the last confirmed tent breeding site, which is just here. So we're working with the farmer and the neighbours to increase the extent of ditch banks that have suitable habitat for the moth. And we're holding extra volunteer days to introduce food plants within a kilometre of the current population that is just circled. So once the roots of these marshmallow plants are more established in a few years' time, they will be able to support larval feeding, and this should allow the population size to increase and form a meta-population in the local area. So supporting a stronger population in this Kent location will increase the chances of these moths naturally dispersing into these areas, which are currently suitable for the moth. So hopefully it will increase our chances of these moths being encountered across a wider distribution. So engagement events have been so good, and we've been reaching so many people over the past 2 years throughout Kent. So especially during the Big Moth Safari Week, which we've been holding in June, and it's a week-long event to kind of get the general public out looking for moths and getting engaged. So last year we held online and in-person events, and this led to 5,229 people being engaged and interacted with our stuff. So throughout the week, we held an introduction to Moths Morning at a farm in the black-veined moth landscape, and we had a session creating moths, learning about them with an artist in Wildwood in the Blean Woods landscape. And that was amazing. So they learned about the anatomy of moths, they learned about the differences between moths and butterflies, and they all got to create a little moth to take home. So this interactive Why Do Moths Matter display has been created by the same artist for engaging new audiences into the world of moths and answer those most asked questions. So the public have loved it so far. So they have to add the zeros onto the end of how many total moth species they think are in the UK. They learn about the life cycle. It's really cool, interactive way. All of that kind of comes apart and they have to add all the different things on for them to learn. So the public absolutely loved it. They've really engaged in it. And we're looking at getting some more slightly different ones to learn about other things about moths. So artistic projects and collaborations have helped bust moth myths, providing engagement in a new way rather than just traditionally getting outdoors. So some moth artwork, as you can see here, may be more recognisable as actual species than others. But from surveys before and after sessions, we've seen that participants' perception has changed from moths being brown, scary, creepy crawlies, just night flying, to bright, colourful creatures with important roles to play in ecosystems. So the plans for this coming year will include raising awareness through lighting up big glass sculptures of endangered species to use as giant glowing moth traps. So I think that'll look pretty cool within the Kent landscape. So the discovery of the pink striped larvae of the Sussex emerald moths made BBC South East News last year for the population that has been found in Sussex, having been confirmed breeding there for the first time. 21 volunteers learned how to identify their caterpillars at Sussex Emerald survey training sessions, which, just like the black-veined moth, is a way we can confirm these new breeding sites, since the adults are very good at dispersing and turning up in habitats where you may not actually expect them to be breeding. So 2022 was the best year for Sussex Emerald at their stronghold in Dungeness since the larval monitoring began. So as you can see from the exceptional numbers in this graph, showing the number of adult moths that subsequently came to just 2 moth traps in that year. So the reasons behind these totals are thought to be relatively dry spring that resulted in a high number of larval survival, combined with that prolonged period of warm, calm, nocturnal conditions that kind of meant the adults were kind of prime conditions to come to those moth traps. We also had a high rate of dispersal this year, which probably accounted for occurrences in many of the widely distributed localities. So we were even made aware of sightings in Essex. So there's lots to be investigated this year. So there's more likely to be other newly colonised areas that are currently undiscovered. So we hope we can increase this year and find some new locations. So caterpillar searches are planned for the next year to confirm suspicions that Sussex emeralds are successfully breeding in land at Stodmarsh as well as Thanet. So here's the map. You can kind of see the difference for those that aren't familiar with Kent. These places do not have the exact habitat, which is slightly enriched vegetated shingle, that Sussex emerald larvae have been exclusively using according to literature. So confirming these kind of other habitat types that they will now accept will add and be a great benefit to understanding their ecological preferences. So hopefully these are the first signs that Sussex emerald are becoming slightly less specialised in their larvae requirements and will be colonising new habitat types and spread inland on their own. So the occasional adult is known to disperse several kilometres away from their traditional breeding habitat sites, but the discovery of multiple fresh adults for successive years in the same inland reserve indicates that there are early life stages there. And the areas we found, they are warm microclimates with free draining soil. So we're just hoping that it does not restrict them to just shingle beaches anymore, opening up those potential breeding populations in Kent and East Sussex. So Rebecca and I, so Rebecca's my colleague, she's a conservation officer on the project, has been showing volunteers across Kent how to identify eggs of the elusive fiery clear-winged moth. So this has led to the moth's known abundance and distribution almost tripling in size in 2 years. We now know that these moths are rapidly spreading inland using new habitat types, moving away from the threats they face at the coast. They're increasingly using food plants with longer with longer grass habitats than their traditional coastal and cliff sites. So these target areas are where we suggest searching for these clear wings because you're most likely to have the most success. So you can see that they've really kind of moved inland. So 2,883 fiery clearing eggs were found and counted across 25 sites by Rebecca and I and volunteers in the project's first year. This was up from 975 across 7 sites in the previous year. Even more breeding sites have been discovered in year 2. 22 new sites have been found in total since the project began. So despite this continued increase in the number of sites where eggs were found in 2022, the egg abundance was down. This was largely due to poor weather during the previous winter, as well as during their flight period, with the reduced chances of males locating females, as the females were moving inland to find suitable food plants to lay their eggs upon. So what's really good is the abundance of eggs was up at Samphire Hoe, which is our focus site for increasing the larval food plant availability for the fiery clearings. It's a very safe site. It's not at risk from kind of the increasing kind of sea storms that we're getting. So a moth whose food plant isn't as abundant as the curled dock is the white-spotted sable. So this moth is a very distinctive micromoth, similar to the size of the familiar garden moth, the mint moth. Unfortunately, within Kent, this moth is thought to only have a strong population remaining in Denge Wood, which is just south of Canterbury. The main cause for this is its very specific requirements regarding the food plant goldenrod. So you may be more familiar with the Canadian goldenrod in a garden setting. This is the low-growing native relative, and it has been declining in woodlands that are generally receiving less coppice in management combined with an increased tree planting, which can be at the expense of leaving kind of open glade habitats, which Lepidoptera rely on. So the scattered remaining white-spotted population in the UK kind of favour glades and rides that receive continued management to keep them open and keep them nice and sunny. The adults are eye-catching and flitter between vegetation in the sunshine, but like many Lepidoptera, we think the requirements for this larvae are leading to the species becoming rarer and rarer. So the larvae are small and green and do not want to be found, obviously, by potential predators. So instead, the adults seem to seek out plants growing at the glade and ride edges, where the goldenrod are virtually disappearing over the overhanging shrub branches, which obviously adds more protection, but does make it trickier to keep that environment that they kind of seem to love. So because of their need to have some shelter and protection as larvae, the fresh grown goldenrod that comes when areas are newly coppiced and then suddenly become very open and sunny, which had been benefiting the Heaths artillery butterfly in the Bleamwoods complex, won't be suitable for these moths. Several suitable glades for the moth has been identified within the RSPB area of Bleamwoods, so targeted surveys are planned throughout the next year to improve the knowledge of where these moths are successfully breeding. So these yellow circles show the areas where some goldenrod plants have been found, and we're working with landowners to increase the availability of the goldenrod in these suitable areas to hopefully increase where the moth can be found and where it can be dispersed to. One species that is not great at spreading to available suitable habitat by itself is the Fisher's estrine moth. We have 3 known populations in Kent. These sites now all receive dedicated monitoring efforts, finding the white frass volcanoes to determine whether which of their food plants were occupied during the summer, and then returning with torches to see where the adults can be found in the autumn. Getting this monitoring in place means we can find the exact areas of these sites that the moths are using to help landowners with their management. Fisher's estrines are found very close to their food plants during the surveys, leaving dispersal to new areas of plants pretty unlikely. So there's a very large area of food plant growing at Faversham Creek across the north of Kent, which hasn't been naturally colonised by Fisher's estuarine moths in 20+ years. In the 20+ years that they have been recorded in Kent. So we're in discussion with Natural England, the Environmental Agency, and local landowners that are willing to provide stepping stones and corridors of habitat to connect Faversham and Tankerton. We're looking into the possibility of introducing adults and eggs from the Kent populations to help them move across to the Faversham area in autumn. So yes, that's me done. Any questions I will try and answer, but I may have to take your questions if they are very species specific to the conservation officer, who is very nicely on holiday today.
That's great. Thanks very much, Emma. Yeah, good to have the support of your colleagues when you need them. There is one question. It's not very species specific, and I imagine it's something that you've probably been asked quite a lot at all of the public road shows and things that you've been doing, all that fantastic engagement work. And the question is, can we create new habitat in our gardens to help more moths visit? So presumably not necessarily thinking about marshmallow moth or Fisher's estuarine moth. But...
Yeah, so yeah, we've kind of been chatting with the Wild Spaces and Stuff project that's going on at the moment for that exact reason. Yeah, so we're just kind of encouraging people and kind of, yeah, giving them best kind of advice on how they can kind of get moths, general kind of moths in their garden. And if they are in these priority landscapes as well, we have quite a few people that are getting these priority moths in their gardens as well. It just kind of depends on where you're situated. But yeah, absolutely, we can yeah, be improving our gardens and stuff for the general moths as well.
Great, thank you. How that'd be really cool to get any of those species in your garden, wouldn't it? But as you say, they're quite, some of them are quite dispersive moths, and so if you live in that landscape, there's a chance you might get them. But
yes,
yeah, I think general sort of gardening advice: not be too tidy, things like that. Have good range of structure. Get some native trees and shrubs in your garden, things like that.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So yeah, well, we're on time, which is really good. So thanks for that, Emma. It's a really inspiring project and so much good news about some seriously rare moths. So you know, it's important that there's good news and there's positive signs amongst all the doom and gloom about moths and other insects to keep us all going. And the world's not entirely going down the pan. Great, thank you very much. So I will we'll move on to the next talk, and then after this talk we have a little break. So our next speaker is Jamie Alison, who I gather you're in Germany, Jamie, right now, but you're based at Aarhus University in Denmark. And so we're now moving from, so we've done moth recording, we've talked about a bit about moth conservation in that Kent project. And I guess Jamie's talk is a little bit about, well, why do we bother conserving moths? I mean, obviously we all know the answer to that because they're awesome. But you know, why should the public, why should politicians, why should funders be bothered about conserving moths? And you know, part of that reason is that they do important stuff. So over to you, Jamie. Welcome, and thanks for in advance for your talk.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen? Is that all coming through properly?
Yeah, I can see that. If you switch to slideshow mode, it should work. At the moment, I can see your slides.
Oh, there we go. How's that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I really enjoy these meetings. I'm Jamie. I'm working at Aarhus University in Denmark as a postdoctoral researcher. I also used to work at UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which some of you may have heard of. So I'm going to talk today about one small drop of evidence which is relevant to this question: have we underestimated moths as pollinators? And is my slide not progressing?
No, not at the moment.
There we go. I'll use that. So yeah, kind of following on from what Richard was saying about pollination and moths. So I did actually want to open by saying this talk is focused on pollination, but I don't want to be understood as thinking that that's what moths are good for, and indeed all the other insects that we call pollinators. So any insects that visit flowers, and there's two things I want to say. Firstly is just to bring attention to all the other amazing things that they do. So for example, the hoverfly in the image on the bottom left, the larvae of that hoverfly are actually really important predators of some insects that are pest species. Moths, beyond their role as pollinators, also play very important roles in shaping vegetation communities through herbivory. Basically, there's all these kinds of forces going on, and these animals are doing so many amazing things that I don't want to sound like pollination is the be all and end all. But of course it is important, and it's important for the reproduction of wild plant species. It can be important for crop yield and agriculture. But above all, as Richard says, I couldn't say it any better really. They're just very cool, and I think the talk we've just seen from Emma was a great example of just how diverse and interesting these animals are. Just a little disclaimer there to start with. I'm going to start by talking about cameras, which I'm really interested in the use of cameras to monitor insects and moths. And this is a kind of a case study which is involving cameras, red clover and moths. And I'm going to talk to you about the background of that case study and what we found. Then I'm going to talk about a kind of a bit of a unique opportunity that the study presented us, which was to sort of have a think about how moth pollination might actually compare on a like-for-like basis with pollination by some groups of bees. And then I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk about some ideas of future technologies that could upscale the amount of data that we can collect about moths. And yeah, myself, I'm very interested in data. The more I can get, the better. And I'm hoping that at least some of you will share that sentiment, because I haven't spared you the data. I've got a few graphs in here, and I hope that some of you might enjoy that and not just be confused by it. So yeah, to introduce the study, this is, I hope what you can see here is a kind of a moving picture of us setting up a field site within what's called the Range X project. And it's not a project about moths, it's a project about climate change and plant species expansion uphill. So what we're doing here in this image is we're setting up these open top chambers to warm the hillside. This is at above 2,000 meters in the Swiss Alps, and we're introducing some plants and seeing if how much better they will survive under a warmed condition. And we're also monitoring the native plant community. But obviously, an important part of what allows a plant species to survive and reproduce is pollination. So that's where my role comes in, and we're using cameras to study pollinators in these sites. This is hopefully you can see now a moving picture of myself and Evelyn at the low elevation site in Switzerland now, setting up these we call them quadrupods, so these like metal four-legged frames which have a time-lapse camera, and these cameras are used for different kinds of wildlife monitoring. But what we're doing here is, instead of pointing the camera up and looking for I don't know, wolves and hares, we're pointing the cameras down and we're looking for flowers and insects. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. And this first study, so this first sort of bit of investment we did, it's worth bearing in mind this is before our kind of experiment has really come to fruition. So we have actually set up these cameras before we're expecting our treatments to have done their thing. So this is more of a proof of concept work. So we wanted to go through and see how these cameras are doing at recording pollinators, and we focused on red clover as a starting point. And you can see here that red clover was quite a dominant flower in these Swiss alpine meadows. So I hope you can see a moving picture with this burst of yellow in the earlier part of the summer, and then that turns into a burst of pink with the thymus, and then the red clover coming through afterwards. So kind of shows you the temporal coverage you can get with this time-lapse approach. And if some of you might also be able to see a sort of hailstorm event just popping up there in one frame, which is fun to see. Red clover is also very, very important in terms of its role as a source of forage for pollinators. So in particular, bumblebees and long-tongued bumblebees especially, some of which have been seen to decline in Europe, are thought to have been, and some of those declines are thought to have been associated with a reduction in cover of this species. It's also one of the most recommended species for nectar mixes, for example, for bumblebees. So it's known to be, firstly, very important for pollinators, but it's also very dependent on pollinators. So in the vast majority, well, basically in all cases, this species won't set seed in the absence of pollination. And that's important because it's it's a species of agricultural importance. So outside my window, where my office used to be when I was in Kalu in Denmark, you would see fields of red clover, and it's because it's a very important forage crop, very nutritious. It also is a legume and is putting nitrogen into the soil, so it's perhaps a bit of an all-rounder. But the seed production of this plant is actually quite a valuable industry. And my figures are slightly updated, but in 2010, this was the second most valuable forage legume in terms of seed production. So basically, it's not the most widespread crop, but it's a player. And so the pollination of the species is important not only for the species in itself, but also for its cultivated versions, which actually are making someone money and making us some food. So the first question that we set out to address here was simply, how does the cover of this species and the visitation of this species vary through time? We did this in quite a simple way, which is to go through every image that we collected of the species across all of our cameras and annotate, which basically means we're drawing a square around, drawing a square around those flowers and drawing a square around every insect that appears to be visiting and pollinating them. But the cool thing about what we did here is these cameras we've used, they have a LED flash on them. And so we said, well, we need to use these at nighttime, even though we lose some images in the daytime. We need to see what's happening at night, just based on a feeling that nighttime pollination is perhaps ignored too often. So yeah, we have pictures being taken 24 hours a day for several months, and watching the entire flowering period of these red clover flowers, and we have pictures being taken every 5 minutes. And so we miss a lot of visits, but the important thing to note is that while we miss a lot of visits, we also get a very representative picture in terms of the visits that we do see. So they're a completely sort of systematic sample through the whole of 2 months, which is difficult to get without these cameras. And we'll talk more about that as I move through. So this is a graph of what we found through the annotation process. So the first thing you can see is the pink line, which is the cover of Trifolium praten's red clover flowers through time. So day of the year along the x-axis. And as we move further right, that's kind of the year progressing. And you can see this kind of peak around day 200, 204, 205. So that's good that we can see how the cover changes in a really detailed way. But then we also have the observed visits by pollinators. And so I've shown these in 3 categories. So first we have the bumblebees, which are in the kind of mid blue, and you can see the bumblebee visits are really spread quite evenly through the season. So they're providing visitation at almost all times of year, and they're fairly tolerant to the cooler parts of the distribution of this flower through time, the colder periods. But notably, we have in the middle here this big spike, and it's pretty much the vast majority of this visitation, which is by moths in dark blue there, is happening in one evening and early morning of day 206, which is actually very interesting because as I'll talk about a bit further, visitation of and pollination of red clover by moths is not something that has been really much discussed or even hypothesized, let alone anyone showing a lot of evidence for it. But also because it happens in such a short period of time. So this is like a burst pollination event. And it's something that you can almost see from this graph why it would be so difficult to pick it up, because if you were to go out and do a survey of pollination of this flower manually, the chances are you would just happen to miss that one night where most of the action happened. But you would probably stumble across some bumblebees doing their thing. So it's kind of it shows the utility of using this kind of time-lapse camera-based monitoring approach. And so you might be wondering which moths are doing most of this visitation, and you may or may not be surprised to see that it's actually our old friend Noctua pronuba, large yellow underwing, is doing the vast majority of these visits. There's a couple of other species in there, but really most of this is the large yellow underwing. So a candidate for the most abundant macromoth species in northwestern Europe, I would say, and one that you'll be seeing in your traps. And some nights probably getting quite frustrated by this species. But this is just a really interesting example that shows that sometimes the common species are actually out there doing some really important stuff. So yeah, just a kind of an interesting thing there. Not something you necessarily would have thought about when you look at your large yellow underwings in your trap, but this is what they might be out there doing. Of course, this is currently only observed at this paper only covers one site on fairly high up on the side of a mountain in Switzerland, but we've also had a glance at some of the sites that we have in Norway as well, and we are observing moth visitation of red clover there. So I think it's the case that this isn't just one site where this is happening. I think it's a case of we haven't been looking for this, and if we did start looking for it, we'd observe it much more often. So yeah, to give you an idea, that part of the reason this is important is because of red clover and the fact that it's actually received a lot of study. So we've been scientists have been studying the pollination of this plant, probably by virtue of the fact that it can help make money in some way by providing forage and generating seeds that can be sold. But anyway, here's a really old Danish study, which luckily has an English summary at the end, which says all other insects other than honeybees and bumblebees, which are called humblebees essentially in Danish, are of no importance to the pollination of this plant. Of course, that's 100 years ago almost. So fair enough. But this this does kind of prevail through into the 60s. So the only pollinators of red clover and alfalfa of any consequence are the bees. But there's also a recent review and a very good review of the literature published in 2021. And again, there's no relevance. There's no mention of moths, although there is in this particular review an indication that there's not enough work done not enough thorough work done on the pollination of this plant, although it's relatively well studied as the plant kingdom goes. Yeah, that's. Oh yeah, I would like to actually at this point out that there are some studies using DNA DNA metabarcoding or kind of study of pollen on the bodies of moths, which has started to show that potentially there's some of the congeneric species, other trifolium species, are being visited by moths by virtue of the fact that pollen from them has been found on the moths' bodies. But I'm not aware of studies kind of catching the moths in the act like this. That's the first part of the study. So it's pretty interesting. We see these moth visitation to a flower that we hadn't really seen before, and the cameras have really helped us with that. But we also want to show something about the relationship between these visits and the seed set of those red clover flowers. So pollination, although we think of pollinators as insects that visit flowers, really pollination is about the reproduction of the plant. So this was actually done blindly. So before we looked at these images, we actually recorded, collected, and dissected the flower heads underneath the cameras. So we counted, independently counted the seeds of these flowers, which we could then use to compare with the kind of recorded history of those flower heads on camera. And we're using this question now to look at whether if we include this information about moth visitation, which previous studies probably would have missed by virtue of only looking during the day, can we improve the predictions of the seed set of these flower heads? And so more graphs here. So what I'm going to show you first is the view of the data if we only recorded the bumblebee visitation and we only looked at the bumblebees. So on the y-axis here, so as you go higher up on these graphs, you have an increase in the seed set of the flower head in question. And I've divided the flower heads on the bottom axis here into those that were visited by no pollinators on camera and those that were pollinated by bumblebees on camera, if we exclude everything that happened at night. And what you can see is there is a slight increase in the seed set of these flower heads when they were visited by bumblebees. But actually, if we kind of ran our statistical test on this, we'd find that it's quite a weak relationship. And yeah, we're seeing some positive effect, but it seems like something else is going on. And now, if I can draw your attention to the left panel of this graph, and this is essentially the same graph, but what I've done is I've divided up what you saw before as the light blue and the dark blue, so the bumblebee visited inflorescences and the unvisited flower heads, into 2 bars each. So they're now been split. So firstly, we have the none column, so the dark blue, has now been split into those that were in fact visited by no pollinators, even if we include the nighttime information. And then we have those which were actually visited by moths, and we actually ignored that information. And you can see that none bar comes right down, and you have this you now have this moth visited set of flowers, which actually have quite a high seed set. In fact, on average, higher than those visited by bumblebees. And this is information that we just missed before and was confusing the picture for us. But then also we have those inflorescences in blue, which were seen to be visited by bumblebees. And if we actually have some were visited by bumblebees and also visited by moths. And then we have a subset there, which is the highest in terms of seed set. So potentially some additive effect of pollination by moths and bumblebees, although we don't have the data to really dig into that phenomenon right here. So the short story is, yes, moths are contributing to the seed set of red clover, and on a comparable level to bumblebees, with at least as we see it within this data set. So I'm going to show you some. This is probably the most complicated part of the talk. I also wanted to dig into this a bit further because there are sort of different. This is so far a correlative, well, it is overall an observational study. There was no experiment done. We didn't, for example, cover up the flowers of the red clover in the day and at night, which would be the perfect way to see the relative value of daytime and nighttime pollination. However, it's quite labor intensive and requires quite a lot of organization and foresight. So I want to do the next best thing, which is basically use the structure of these flower heads to understand when they set seed. Was it earlier or later in the season? And I'm going to try and explain why that is now. So it's the way that the red clover flower heads open. They start with the florets at the bottom, as you can see on the left here. I'm going to call them the basal florets, and then you get the florets in the middle opening up, and as you can see under B there, and then at the end of the flowering period, you have the florets at the apex at the very top, which are then ready to be visited and to set seed. So basically, when I was dissecting these flowers, I asked the question: are the seeds at the bottom? Are the seeds mostly distributed towards the middle, or are they at the top? And that basically says, was this plant pollinated in the early, the middle, or the end of its flowering period? And then I related that information to the time when they were actually visited on camera. So that's the other good thing about the continuous capture. We can get the exact time, date, hour, minute of the visit to that flower, that floret. Well, yeah, that flower. So this is the graph that results. So what you can see here is each of these dots is an is a red clover flower head, and you can see based on the color whether it was a flower head that was visited by bumblebees, moths, or both. As discussed earlier, this is only the flower heads that did receive visits. And then along the x-axis there, you can see. Sorry, I'm trying to move your faces so I can see my slide. You can see basically that the inflorescences further right along this graph are the ones that were visited later in the flowering period. So they were visited by moths and bumblebees at the end of their overall flowering cycle. And on the y-axis, you have those which I found more seeds in those apical, those late opening florets. And hopefully I managed to carry some of you through that journey, but the long story short is this is a bit more of a smoking gun. It's not quite the smoking gun, but it's a bit more of a smoking gun for the role of bumblebees and moths in the pollination and reproduction of this plant. So those that were visited later tended to set seeds in the later opening florets, and that was just as true for moths as it was for bumblebees, apparently, if we have a look at this graph here. So yeah. That was us doing our due diligence, basically. And we all know that moths play a role as pollinators, but this is an interesting study of quite a well understood flower, and finding something which hadn't been discussed previously when maybe it should have been. And for me, it does highlight that sometimes we are a little bit, when I say we, I mean pollination biologists, are maybe a little bit moth blind, a little bit not considering what's happening at night, and that's basically what we've shown here. And I encourage any of you who maybe want to have a look at a scientific paper, but feel perhaps a bit intimidated by most papers. I think this might be quite a readable one. It's completely open access. In biology letters, so if you ever fancied having a go at reading a scientific paper, it's a very short and snappy one, and it might be of interest. So yeah, you can just Google moths red clover and you'll be able to see it. So yeah, that's me finished talking about this case study, and I'm just going to have a quick couple of words if I've got time. Please stop me, Richard, if I haven't. To discuss some exciting different ways that we might be starting to monitor moths in the future. And perhaps even some of you might end up trying out some of these approaches over the next 10 years or so, depending on how things progress. But basically, my colleague in Aarhus University, Kim Bjerre, has done he kind of pioneered this really fascinating approach of setting out this screen, as we're all used to doing to study moths. Perhaps you know, with a few drinks around the fire, you can look at moths in this way. But what he's done is he's set up a camera which is taking time-lapse photography of moths throughout the night. And the kind of really amazing thing that he has done is he's created this kind of artificial intelligence model which can detect where those moths are in the images, and to a certain level of accuracy identify what species they are, which is really quite amazing. And there are, when you use these kind of methods, you produce so many data that automating that process of detecting the insects and identifying them, at the very least as a first pass, perhaps then they can be screened much in the same way as volunteer submitted records are. This is it's pretty fascinating, and it's something that's being rapidly developed at the moment. So colleagues from both UKCEH and from Aarhus University are in Panama at the moment, testing these kinds of technologies in more tropical or extreme field conditions and extremely diverse areas also. So yeah, this is just a very interesting area that I thought some of you might be interested to see that this is happening if you hadn't already seen it. And then finally, I just want to show you this this video, which is again my colleague Kim Bier. He's also doing some camera-based monitoring of green roofs in Aarhus, and basically he's trained an algorithm to detect and identify pollinators of these sedum flowers on this green roof. And it's the reason he's able to do this is because he's collected so much data on this system and able to train these algorithms with so much data in order to do that. So it's very difficult to do this at scale and to do this for any group in any scene. It's actually very challenging. But I think this kind of example here is just it's kind of a nice idea of what if we could do this for moths on the sallow in your garden, for example. Yeah, just an interesting thought. So I'd just like to thank the funders. This is a Biodiversa funded project with especially input from Innovation Fund Denmark for the Danish portion of it. It's a large international project as well, though. And then my colleagues Hjelderman and Togohoye at Aarhus University, and also some colleagues in Zurich, who are kind of the locals who helped to set up the field experiment in Switzerland that I've talked to you about here. So hopefully I haven't gone too far over. I'd like to thank you for listening, and also just thank you for everything that you do. And yeah, the community that you're a part of basically reared me into the moth world, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And yeah, just everything that you do is extremely valuable.
That's brilliant, Jamie. Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank goodness you decided to leave the cameras on at night. Otherwise, all of that would still be unknown.
I didn't have to fight too hard for that, but it was definitely something that I was keen to do, to make the project that wasn't supposed to be about moths.
Absolutely. Let's just make all science about moths, as well as whatever its intended subject is. So yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've gone a little bit over, but it was really fascinating. There are some questions for you in the Q&A. So maybe if you don't need to dash off, maybe you could have a look. I'm guessing you've probably got access to answer questions in the Q&A. So maybe you could have a look at that.
I'll get straight on that. Yeah, sorry for running over.
Great. No, that's fine. So we've got a break now in the programme. So for just sort of 15 minutes, basically just over 15 minutes, the next talk will start at 11:40. So I will bid you a farewell briefly, and stretch your legs, get a refreshed hot drink and all of that kind of stuff, and we will carry on with the amazing moth science and conservation after a short break. Thanks. Hopefully you've had a chance to get up and move about a bit. It's great to be able to sit and watch all of these talks. Wonderful to have so many people from all over the UK and indeed other parts of the world as well. joining us. That's one of the great benefits, of course, of doing these meetings online. I noticed in the chat earlier on that we had people joining us from Dubai, from Italy, and from Scandinavia. So welcome to everyone. A reminder, and I'll remind you again at the end of the meeting about the evaluation form. It's really important that we can get a sense of the pros and cons of running these meetings online versus in person, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see in the future. So please do that. Jamie is valiantly battling his way through all of the excellent questions that were asked of his talk. So thanks for doing that, Jamie. But we will crack on. So we've got two more talks for you this morning, both which promise to be really interesting, really fascinating. They're both species focused on particular moths, moths that many of us won't have seen, but nevertheless some very interesting positive and negative stories associated with them. So we're starting with Durwyn. Liley, I never know how to say your surname, Durwyn. Sorry about that. Is it Liley or is it Lily?
It's Liley.
I thought it would be Liley. Yeah, okay. So Durwyn's going to tell us about the amazing detailed work that he and others have been doing for one of the UK's rarest moths, the speckled footman. Over to you, Durwyn.
Thanks, Richard. And can I just check everyone can see that?
Yeah, we're seeing the overall view there. That's good. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
And bear with me. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. I'm Durwyn Liley. I'm an ecologist based in Dorset, and most of my work is on birds and people. I've never spoken at a moth event before. So it's great to be speaking today, and I want to tell you about an amazing moth, speckled footman, that has certainly got me hooked. This is the relevant page from the Moth Atlas. Speckled footman in the UK is a distinct subspecies, but it occurs across the continent on heathland, sand dunes, and in the Channel Islands. And migrants of that subspecies, the continental species, can occur. When we look at the records from Dorset, from the UK, you can see that they are concentrated on Dorset and the New Forest. The Atlas states that since the late 1990s, it's restricted to just 3 Dorset sites, with few records post 2010. So I want to focus on that area in the red circle. That's the Dorset Heaths, the bit with the darker dots and those Dorset sites. And this is the Dorset Heaths. They comprise some 8,000 odd hectares of heathland, plus additional areas of forestry and sort of associated heathland habitats. And there's over 40 different SSIs. And there's been lots of changes over time in terms of fragmentation, planting with conifers, urban pressures, the conurbations of Poole and Bournemouth, and also fire. So the heaths have been a major focus for conservation work in Dorset. And there's been recent initiatives to create the super NNR that you might have heard of in Purbeck, joining up much of the heathland blocks to create a single grazing unit that extends across multiple landowners. And much of that work has been focused around the south and west shores of Poole Harbour. And then these are the records of speckled footman overlaid from Dorset Environmental Records Centre, going back to pre-1950. So the darker the red, the more recent the records, with no records held from that database beyond 2015. You can see that the moth was quite widely spread across the Dorset Heaths and has gradually disappeared and shrunk the distribution and range. So zooming in on that area just around Poole Harbour, In Dorset, I think it has always been rare, scarce and patchy. There are records of Victorian naturalists coming down specifically to search for it and being able to walk out from the station at Ringwood and netting them during the day. Those accounts are on the Dorset Moths website. But looking more recently, there was 120 trapped at Sleep Heath in 1976. Sleep Heath was since, was around that time planted with conifers. The planting started in the 1960s, and the moths has subsequently disappeared from those areas. But even in the 1980s, it was still being recorded across Arn and Hartland. Those sites have been in conservation management and hold really good heathland and are very extensive, but it's subsequently gone from those areas. In the early 2000s, there were a handful of records from Canford, including some adults caught and some larvae, but there have been no records there since 2004. Chris Manley caught some at Trigon and fairly regularly up until around 2010, but again, no records after 2010. And then there were some records, quite small numbers and erratic, from Wareham Forest and the sort of north end of Wareham Forest up to around 2014. But then, as far as I'm aware, no records 2014 to 2019 on the Dorset Heaths. So a patchy distribution that seems to have come and gone, and very little understanding as to why. Roll on to 2019, and I live and work in Dorset, and I've been involved in heathland conservation for decades. In 2018, it was a very good friend, James Lowen, who contacted me, and he was planning a book on moths and was developing a mouth-watering itinerary for a year of mothing. I suggested he came to Dorset and we tried for speckled footman. So James stayed for most of a week in July and we tried trapping on a number of local heaths. And on the 19th of July, I organised an evening of trapping across Wareham Forest, sorting this out with Forestry England and involving a whole wide range of moth trappers. And we put traps across Wareham Forest. We tried traps right the way across, and with no success. It was an amazing night and a fantastic species list, but no speckled footman. James has all the luck of the gods, and he saw all the moths in his book, bar one, all the rare and scarce species he was targeting across the country, and that one was speckled footman. There's James, that's the book I'm talking about. And with that trapping event in July, generating no speckled footman, there was a worry that speckled footman was extinct in the UK. This is where I work, and this is where I'm speaking to you from today. I'm looking out of those windows. It's in Wareham Forest. I run a company called Footprint Ecology, and we share the office and rent office space from Forestry England. It's a fabulous place to work, and we run a moth trap regularly. In fact, I've been running a moth trap from here for years, for a very long time. And that's not just myself, it's colleagues at Footprint Ecology. And the 24th of June, 2020, we were that was the first day coming back after lockdown, post-COVID, and most of us had been at our homes. We hadn't been out much. We were keen to run a moth trap. And I couldn't quite believe what was in the top of the trap. It was a speckled footman. And I didn't quite recognize it even at first. The wings weren't tightly furled as shown in many of the pictures. It was the first one I'd seen. And you can see in that bottom left picture, the wings being open and flat that rather caught me by surprise. So it was a male, and there is a few patches of heathland near the office, but no obvious habitat to support the species. So Wareham Forest is enormous. It contains a whole wide range of different heathland habitats, and it's a mixture of wetland, forestry, and open heath. It's over 1,500 hectares. And not only that, there's heathy bits, gravel pits, and other forestry bits extending well beyond. So that moth that turned up at our office had come from somewhere, and I was really keen to work out where. But as you'll appreciate, it could have come from quite some distance. So the following summer, with permission from Forestry England, it was a game of battleships. We tried trapping at different locations across Wareham Forest with a range of traps and a wide number of people coming out to help. And that summer we managed over 50 trap nights, trapping and putting traps in a whole range of different locations, just randomly trying to see if we could catch any more speckled footmen. And we did. We caught 21. And they were scattered from all over the forest, but there was one particular area where we caught a fair few. In fact, we had 6 around just a couple of traps in one night. And there's some of the images from that year. You can see that top right one. When on the ground, they're very well camouflaged, but they are really distinctive. And it's occasionally that the moths are sort of tightly furled with their wings closed, but quite often they've got their wings open. And like that one at the bottom of the trap, bottom left, it's often the first view. So 21 records across Wareham Forest, that's amazing. I was really excited and hooked, but really keen to understand more and understand in depth what might be going on. So in 2022, we tried larval searches in the forest. In the early part of the year, January, February, targeting sunny days, there was a few of us came out. We tried a vac, we tried just parting the grass and the vegetation searching, and we found no larvae. Come the summer, we consolidated the findings from the previous year and caught 30, extending the areas where we'd caught them, and we managed over 100 trap nights. So that's a phenomenal amount of trapping, and it's down to a whole range of different folk that came out and helped me throughout that flight period. So the moths are only around for about a month, so those 100 trap nights represent a huge pulse of moth trapping in July. Those images show some of the variation, with the bottom left, one of the right towards the end and quite worn just towards the end of July. These are the kind of habitats we were catching them in, with the catching taking the late June through July. That one from 2020 was the earliest one we've caught. The atlas and other data shows records into August, but we've not caught any into August. Now the habitats are all quite open and dry, but there's a range of heathy habitats surrounding where we've caught the moth. A lot of vegetation to potentially search for larvae. We've been running traps mostly on the tracks because those are the ways we're getting around the forest, and they're also the obvious places to be able to put generators, to put traps and access. But there's lots of bare ground. They're often gravelly, it's grassy. Bristlebent is the plant that the caterpillars were found on at Canford Heath back in the turn of just after 2000. And all of the areas that we've been trapping, we've been targeting areas of bristlebent. There was a very large fire in Wareham Forest 2 years ago, and certainly most of the records of the speckled footmen that we've been catching are outside the areas that were burnt. And we have been trying areas within the forest that were burnt during that fire. Quite often we've been out all night, often tending to stay with the traps. Despite 2022 being so hot and dry, some of the nights proved really cool, particularly around the edges of the mires, and it was often hard to predict where those cold spots would be. And I think that's perhaps part of the reason some of those cold spells that we weren't perhaps quite as successful as I might have hoped in terms of the number of adults caught. But We have been generating an amazing species list for Wareham Forest, and there's a whole range of really nice moths that keep us entertained when there's not so many speckled footmen. And I was going to end my talk just at this point, but stop press. The last week, 10 days, we've managed to find these, which is absolutely amazing. And it's all credit to Tony Davis, who had the search image and had an idea of where to look. So going around the forest with Tony, and in the last 10 days, we have found over 50 caterpillars so far. So all credit to Tony. And where we have been finding them is limited to a really restricted area. And I'm now trying to understand the habitat management that's taken place there in the past and better understand the habitat requirements a bit more. But the caterpillars are quite easy to see. They're out during hot sun. And the days we found them were really cold. There was a heavy frost during the night. It was just over a week ago, the first ones. And it was mid-morning and around lunchtime when the sun was just the rays of the sun catching the vegetation. And these were the only insects and signs of life we were finding at all. So there is so much left to find out. Why are they so rare? Why no longer in the NNR and those areas that have been under conservation management for so long? Why has the moth proved so patchy and elusive and seems to have come and gone? What might be the implications of climate change, habitat management, grazing, and bare ground management? And that photograph bottom left is from Arn, where one of the areas that was planted and was covered in trees in the 60s. That land has now been reacquired by the RSPB, and the conifers are all off, and it is being returned back to heathland. And so there's some real changes in the areas that the speckled footman was recorded back in the 70s. And I'm really keen and have a vision that perhaps sometime in the future it might regain some of its former range. But there's obviously, excuse me, quite a way to go to get there. And the next steps, I think, are trying to understand the larvae, and we'll be continuing to monitor the larvae and starting to try and define the habitat much more closely. Potentially then we can start to map where that habitat remains on the Dorset Heaths and target other areas to trap. It could well be, there are other colonies out there. And given the amazing conservation work that's happening across the Heaths, I'm really hoping we can feed in the results of the findings here to that conservation management. However, I'd love any further ideas, any further insights, please get in touch. And there's also potential, if anyone's interested, to come and help with trapping in the summer. I'll put my email at the end of the talk if anyone wants to drop me a line. And the journey I've got to so far, it just started with a chance capture, has led to us finding the caterpillars. And it's by trying to trap in lots of locations and a huge volume of trap nights that we've got this far. I work for a consultancy. It's a conservation consultancy, but all of this work has been done in our free time. Enormous thanks to Forestry England. Mark Warren, who's the local beat manager, has been really supportive. And all of the trapping and the larval searches have been under permit and organised very carefully with Forestry England. Also thanks to ARC, the Herptile and the Reptile Conservation Organisation, who have been very helpful in terms of access and advice. Mark Parsons has been out trapping, larval searching, and has been supportive all the way through. Tony Davis and a range of staff at Butterfly Conservation. Richard Fox has been out trapping many nights. There's a whole wide range of other folk that have been helping, and thanks to others at Footprint, Phil and James Lowen for some of the images. And then also I've been badgering lots of other ecologists and people that know the Dorset Heaths, trying to better understand what's been going on and some of the habitat implications, and thanks to them.
That's great. Thank you very much, Durwyn. Really exciting, and all of your hard work and dedication and enthusiasm has paid off in the rediscovery of such relatively huge quantities of speckled footman, and now obviously with this very exciting recent stop press about the larvae that you so was that photo taken on the heath just now? Yeah, brilliant. There aren't any, we have got a few minutes, there aren't any questions specifically about your talk, I don't think. I was going to just ask one. You alluded earlier near the start of your talk to the sort of plans for the new super reserve, which I do vaguely remember hearing about, but what are the, I mean, are there any sort of obvious implications of that plan for speckled footman in terms of linking up habitat, or is it does it not involve the sites where speckled footman has been seen recently? Is it just sort of, some potential for the future because there'll be more habitat and the potential for colonization or reintroduction?
The super NNR is south of Wareham in Purbeck, and that's 3,500 hectares, and it's the new grazing unit is they've reset the cattle grids, taken down a lot of the fencing, and there's a very extensive area that livestock are now grazing, including pigs that are free roaming. And that covers where those 120 were caught in the 70s, and where lots of the old records for speckled footman used to be, and where it seemed to have disappeared in the 90s. So there's potentially, I'd love to see the moth re-establishing back there. Wareham Forest is just 5 miles to the north, something like that. But Wareham Forest is now part of a DEFRA landscape recovery grant, and it's called the Wareham Arc. And there's a real focus here on joining up and making the links round through to the NNR. So Wareham Forest in itself is something like 1,500 hectares, but there's adjacent land. Dorset Wildlife Trust have acquired land to the north. So there's a lot happening in this area, and a lot of real potential, I think, for joining up and seeing how perhaps the moth is able to disperse. I'd love to be able to see us perhaps understanding the habitat better and creating the steps for it to leapfrog back to the NNR.
Absolutely. Well, we'll watch that space, and yeah, I mean, obviously it's great that there's so much attention going on, and the possibility of improving the existing habitats in on those sites that are affected by the new super NNR, and also the creation of new habitat, or the restoration of habitat to make corridors and that kind of thing. So it's all very exciting. Something positive after many decades of destruction of Dorset's heaths. So yeah, thanks very much, Durwyn. That's great. So we're pretty much on time, and we come to our last speaker for today's meeting. I'm very excited about this. I picked up on sort of stories in the media about the conservation status of the Bogong moth, this amazing migratory species in Australia last year, I think it was, maybe in late 2001, and thought with us being online for this meeting, it'd be a great opportunity to hear about a moth on completely the other end of the world. So we're really pleased, very excited and delighted to be joined by Professor Eric Warrant, from speaking to us from Sweden, but talking about a moth from his native land. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yeah, that's great.
I just wanted to start by thanking you all very much for inviting me to come along. It's been I must say, a real eye-opener. I had no idea that there was such an amazing network of people in Britain monitoring moths. It's super impressive, I must say. I was deeply, I'm deeply impressed, actually, that you've got it so well organized and that so many people are involved. Yeah. Okay, but yeah, so as Richard said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about an iconic Australian insect known as the Bogong moth. I work in Sweden, but I'm actually Australian, and I've had an interest in this moth for many, many years. And this is a remarkable animal for many reasons I'll tell you in a moment, but I thought I'd just let you know first why we're studying this. My main interest in research is understanding how animals see in very dim light, particularly insects. And I'm also very interested in how they navigate in very dim light, either over shorter distances or, in the case of the Bogong moth, over very long distances, and which types of visual and other sensory cues they use to navigate. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that research as well, but also touch on something that's probably closer to home for many of you in the audience, and that is that this is, despite being a remarkable insect, it's also threatened at the moment, unfortunately. But I'll come back to that towards the end of my talk. So just to introduce this, I thought I might just mention that in general, when insects migrate, and this includes moths, they generally migrate from one very broad geographic region to another very broad geographic region in search of more favorable conditions. So it's a very broad sort of migration, and there's no specific destination. It's just sort of a change of latitude, often really going from north to south or from south to north. But there are a couple of species that are reasonably well studied, and there are very, very few species that actually fulfill what I'm about to tell you. But there are a couple of species we know of that have highly specific and geographically restricted destinations when they migrate. So they start their journeys from a very wide area, but they all head in different directions, usually, to an incredibly restricted destination. And the best known example of this is the monarch butterfly. You've probably all heard of this animal from North America, which starts its journey from all over the northern United States and the south of Canada. And large numbers of them start flying southwards during the autumn to escape the coming winter. And they all head to this region. I don't know if you can see my little pointer here. I hope so. A mountainous region, a very restricted mountainous region in the middle of Mexico. And here they congregate in vast numbers in trees at this location. And you've probably seen pictures like this of these remarkable assemblies of monarch butterflies hanging in trees, so heavily sometimes that they break the branches of the trees off. And here they spend the North American winter. And this journey is about 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers, and it's the same individual that takes that journey to the mountains in the to the center of Mexico during the autumn, before the winter in North America, and they begin the journey back actually in the spring, but they don't get very far before they have offspring, and those offspring continue the journey to complete the migratory cycle. We know a lot about their migration, and one of the things we know is that in order to find the direction that they need to travel in, they use the sun as a compass. And the sun is a very reliable cue because it's fairly predictable from day to day. It comes up roughly at the same location. It crosses the sky in roughly the same track, and it goes down in roughly the same location day in, day out over lots and lots of weeks. And if you know, as the monarch butterfly knows, exactly how the sun progresses across the sky during the day and can compensate for its position in the sky at different times of the day, then they can keep a constant migratory direction to take them to central Mexico. And this remarkable so-called time-compensated sun compass is actually quite well studied in monarch butterflies. So we know they use the sun for this purpose. But the insect I'm telling you today about, a moth, is equally impressive in regards to this highly specific destination to which they're traveling. This is the Australian Bogong moth, Agrotis infusa. Some of you may have heard of it. It's iconic in Australia. Most Australians have heard of it for reasons I'll tell you about in a moment. It's a long-range navigator, just like the monarch butterfly, but unlike the monarch butterfly, it does its journey at nighttime. And this is something that interests me a lot. So just to give an impression of where this animal is traveling, these moths emerge in spring in Australia, and that, of course, in Australia is September, October. And they've emerged from these areas where in these sort of semi-arid areas in Western New South Wales, Western Victoria, southern and southeastern Queensland. These areas are fairly dry normally in the summer, but during the winter, they're reasonably moist. And they develop as eggs and larvae and pupae under the ground during the winter, and they emerge as adults in the spring. And then they begin this remarkable journey towards one location, which is our absolute highest mountain peaks in the extreme southeast of the country at elevations around 1,800 meters or higher. And the highest mountains in Australia are around 2,200 meters. So it's a very small altitude range. And they're all heading to these high peaks, which are distributed, dotted actually along ridges between the Australian Capital Territory, where the capital Canberra is, down to extreme northeastern Victoria. And they are very specific caves. We know where most of them are. And there have been traditionally about 4.5 billion moths which make this journey in different directions, essentially eastwards if they're coming from Western Victoria, or even southwestwards if they're coming from areas just west of Brisbane in Queensland. So these are, and every other direction in between. The journey is about 1,000 kilometres. And where they're heading is here to the Australian Alps. And these are our highest mountains. As I've said, they're covered in snow during the winter, but during the spring when the snow thaws, they reveal these rocky outcrops. They're essentially assemblages of boulders piled on top of each other. And within those boulders are hollowed out areas which are cave-like, and where the moths are actually heading. So they're all traveling to these specific caves. I should point out that not all of these hollowed out areas are actually visited by moths. Some of them are completely ignored, while others are favoured. But when they reach these caves, this is what they do. So I'll show you what they do in the next slide. They assemble on the walls of these cave-like hollows under the stones, and tile the walls of the caves in vast numbers. There is about 17,000 Bogong moths tiled on the walls of the caves over every square meter. So 17,000 individuals per square meter. So any given cave could quite literally contain millions and millions of moths. It's quite a remarkable sight to see if you ever make it to the Australian Alps in summer and want to see this. They're not easy to find though, these caves. You'd have to contact me if you're interested. But it is a remarkable sight. At the end of the Australian summer, so they spend 3 or 4 months in this dormant state. So they essentially go to sleep like this, and they spend 3 or 4 months in this dormant state, which is known as estivation. It's a little bit like hibernation, but in summer. And then at the end of the summer, at the beginning of autumn, the moths emerge from the caves and they turn around and go back to where they were born. So they make a return journey of about 1,000 kilometers in the opposite direction that they journeyed during the spring. And when they get there, they mate, lay their eggs, and then they die. And then the whole breeding cycle starts afresh, or the whole cycle starts afresh with larvae and pupae developing under the ground. The larvae are eating fresh shoots of plants which are growing during the winter and during winter rainfall to develop into pupae, and then ultimately into adults during the spring. But when the following spring comes, those newly emerged adults emerge and begin immediately their journeys to the mountains again in a particular direction over that particular distance. Now, before I tell you anything about them and this remarkable journey, I thought I just might point out that the migration of these moths to the mountains was well known to the first Australians long before Europeans turned up, and for many, many thousands of years, tribes of our indigenous peoples travelled from both sides of the Great Dividing Range, as it's known. It's a range of mountains that extends along the east coast of Australia, a couple of 100 or 300, 400 kilometres inland from the coast. And they travelled from both sides of that range, from the coastal regions and also from the inland regions, and they assembled on the mountaintops in the Australian summer to actually eat these moths in large numbers, and to conduct tribal business and to arrange marriages. And the Bogong moth became a very important part of their culture, actually. So here's a a classic route that we now know of through research that's been used for thousands of years by the first Australians from Twofold Bay, in this case, just south of Eden at the very bottom of New South Wales, through the wildernesses of the lower alpine areas and up to our highest mountain here, Mount Kosciuszko, a distance of about 265 kilometres. And they would do this every single year. It's quite a trip. And we found many implements which are in various locations that are actually used for grinding up moths into different kinds of patties, moth patties, and other types of foods which they cooked on fires and ate. And the moth, not surprisingly, has become an extremely important part of the cultural heritage of the tribes of indigenous peoples that were living in these alpine or close to these alpine areas in southeastern Australia. So this moth has a tremendous importance for them even today. And so this gives me a great deal of pleasure to work with these moths as well, knowing that they've had this historical connection to our first peoples in Australia for many thousands of years. But just to get back now to the moth itself and its remarkable journey, the questions that have fascinated me over the years is how is this remarkable migratory feat achieved? How do they know how to find these mountains when they emerge from the ground in far-flung areas of southeastern Australia? They've never been to this location before. Their parents have been dead for several months, so nobody's shown them how to get there. All of the information that they have is in their heads when they emerge. So in other words, it's actually inherited from their ancestors. And our question is, how do they know the direction to fly in, and how do they know when to stop? And so far, we've been working mostly with the first question, but we've started now to work even with the second. I won't tell you about that so much today. And I just wanted to briefly introduce you to the kinds of things we've been finding, not in gory detail, because I don't have the time to go into the experimental data in any great detail, but the main things we were interested in were which sensory cues are these bogong moths using to find their migratory direction, this direction that they have in their head that they know they must fly in when they emerge from the ground. Now, they don't have the sun, unfortunately. This, as I mentioned for the monarchs, is a really excellent navigational cue, but no such cue as the sun exists at night. So what could they be using? It is the possibility, for instance, that they could, like nocturnally migrating birds, use the Earth's magnetic field as a compass. That's one possibility. They could also use other kinds of cues, terrestrial landmarks possibly. They could use celestial cues. The moon is a possibility, and so are the stars. But particularly the moon, especially if you compare it to the sun, is very, very unreliable. The moon is up only. It's not up every night, every month. Well, sorry, it's not up every night of each month, nor when it is up, is it in the same place in the sky, or does it have the same size and shape? It's a very difficult cue to use as a compass. You'd have to know about its behavior all month, basically, to use it clearly. The other possibility is the stars. They're a little bit more reliable, but due to the rotation of the Earth, they change their position in the sky as the evening progresses. But nonetheless, they're much more reliable than the moon in this particular case. So we just started to investigate these cues. So the way we do our experiments is that we use a very powerful light beam. We shine up into the sky while they're migrating, either during autumn, as they're migrating into away from the mountains. So this is this area of the Australian Alps where we work, which is known as the Snowy Mountains near Canberra. And we shine this beam of light in the sky, and we literally lure them down onto our sheets while they're in their migratory state. Or we can do this in spring, in this case in very far northern New South Wales, using the same method. We catch them while they're on their way southwards towards the mountains. And then once we've caught them, we have the possibility of using a technique where we tether them onto a little metal stalk with some glue, and then we can suspend them on the end of a stalk, you can see here, and they're freely able to fly on the end of that stalk. And we put them inside an arena that you can see at the top of this image here. And this arena, we can suspend them down into the arena, and they're able to fly in any direction they wish relative to north. They just simply can't fly away, obviously. And then what we're doing then is monitoring their instantaneous flight direction over a period of time to see what direction they are flying in. And we can monitor this direction with the aid of a small device, which I hope you can see at the top of the arena, because I can't quite see that on my computer with all the Zoom stuff in the way. But there's a little device called an optical encoder, which is connected to the top of the axle, which is connected to the moth, which is able to register the instantaneous flight direction of the moth 5 times every second. So over a period of, say, 5 minutes, we can actually record the virtual flight trajectory of the moth as it flies in the conditions that we give it. So we have, for instance, discovered that when we do this on moths in northern New South Wales in the spring, we can detect that they're flying very, very strongly in the southwestern direction. So they really are heading towards the mountains at this location. The same is true in the autumn in the Snowy Mountains. They're heading very much in the opposite direction when we do these experiments on them in the same way. So in order to try, oh, sorry, I forgot to show that film. I hope that's visible there. You can see the moth actually flying on the end of the stalk. I don't have enough time to tell you why. You can see a pattern of landscape underneath the moth, but I can just briefly mention it's much brighter here just so you can see it. Normally it's so dim you can barely see it, but this is actually a Google map image of this environment where we did the experiment. It's moving under the moth to give it the impression that it's actually flying. It's a bit of a stimulation, if you like, to fly. So we've got our arena, and the first thing we tested, I'm just going to give you the take-home messages rather than show you any actual data here. One of the things we could test now is whether the magnetic field of the Earth could be used as a compass. So what we did is we surrounded this arena that I've just shown you in a set of magnetic coils, which you see here, these big aluminium coils here. And then we have the possibility of changing the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. We don't do anything else to the field. We don't change its strength. We don't change the angle of the field lines with the surface of the Earth. But we do, with these coils, have the possibility to turn the angle of the field, the actual direction of the field, from its natural north-south direction to any other direction we like. And if we turn the field, then we would like to, we could ask the question, if we turn the field, is it the case that the moth turns too? And even though that wasn't exactly the result we got, we did discover nonetheless that the magnetic field of the Earth is used as a compass cue in conjunction with visual landmarks. I don't have enough time to go into that in any detail, but it did turn out in the end that the magnetic cues from the Earth's magnetic field are indeed used as a compass, and that they use that compass information together with visual landmarks. A little bit like when we would go hiking, we would use a magnetic compass, and if we wanted to go northwest, we'd work out which direction northwest is, and then we would look for some visual landmark possibly in that direction, like a distant mountaintop, and walk towards that by looking at the mountaintop. And we'd put the magnetic compass away in our pocket. We wouldn't keep looking at the compass all the time, because if we did that, we'd probably fall over a log or something and break our necks. So the moths seem to be doing something similar. So that's why we discovered that the visual landmarks are important. But the other cue is the stars, actually, as I mentioned before. And to test this, what we actually did was we took our arena, which you can see here. Again, you can see this little device, this so-called optical encoder, which is recording the direction of a tethered moth flying. And that tethered moth you can't see here because it's actually suspended below this lid. But this lid is a circular lid we have now, which has some tracing paper on it. We have that actually enclosed in a set of three-dimensional magnetic coils, where we've got the possibility again to manipulate the Earth's magnetic field. I'll come back to what we did there in a second. And then on the top of this set of coils, we've built a frame. And on that frame, we have a projector. And then we use a program which is free and anybody can download on their mobile phone as an app or even on their computer. And it's known as Stellarium. And this program is amazing, actually. It allows you to dial up the any night sky in any location on the Earth at any day of the year, at any time of night. So you can find the local, and it's extremely realistic. So this is a program that's often used in planetariums. And so using this, we were able to produce the same night sky inside the lab that we had outside the lab in the Snowy Mountains where we did these experiments. And we could test the effects of the stars on the migratory directions of migratory moths, which we caught with our light trap and placed on tethers in this arena. The reason why we've got the magnetic coils is that with this set of magnetic coils, we have the possibility of actually getting rid of the Earth's magnetic field entirely. So we can create a kind of magnetic vacuum, if you like. And in this way, we have essentially turned the magnetic sense off, so we can concentrate just on the visual input here alone, without any confounding effects from the magnetic sense. So just the visual sense we're investigating. Now, as I say, I don't have any possibility to tell you about the data, but what I can do is show you the kinds of stimuli we were able to produce with this stellarium. And the night sky differs in spring and autumn. So we used the night sky in spring when we did spring experiments for moths arriving in the mountains. And during autumn, we used the autumn night sky here, you see, when the moths were traveling away from the mountains. And this is the 0 degrees indicates the natural orientation of the sky that the moth would have experienced outside. We also have the possibility to rotate the entire sky 180 degrees in both cases and see if the moths would turn 180 degrees under that night sky if we did that. And it turns out that they did. So the moths would turn under that sky. So we've got the magnetic field turned off, don't forget, so they're not receiving any magnetic input. But if we rotate the sky, the tethered flying moth will turn on its tether 180 degrees and fly in the opposite direction, still in the right direction from the point of view of the night sky, but not obviously in the direction it was heading according to the real north outside. We also have the possibility of taking all of these stars in the night sky and randomly distributing them all over the night sky so that we don't change the total intensity, but we remove all information from the very prominent Milky Way, which you see in the southern hemisphere. When we do that, the moths are completely disoriented. They have no idea where they're going, and they're flying in every different direction you could imagine. And these results, which we got, suggests that they do use stellar cues. In other words, they're able to find their inherited migratory direction by reading the stars as a compass and using the stars as a compass cue, which for us was completely amazing because it turns, just to conclude then, it turns out that these moths seem to be able to use the starry night sky as a true compass to be able to work out its direction towards or away from the mountains relative to north, and thus find their correct migratory direction in different seasons. So they use the stars to fly southwards in the correct direction during the spring and northwards away from the mountains during the autumn. And this was for us a remarkable finding because this is only the third group of animals we know of that are able to use the stars as a compass in this fashion. We ourselves are able to use the stars like this. We've harnessed sextants and other instruments in the past to be able to use the stars for navigation. Some species of night migratory songbirds are able to use the stars in this fashion. And now bogong moths, the first invertebrate animal we know of, they're able to use the stars for navigation. And in addition, the Earth's magnetic field, which is pretty impressive considering that the brain of a bogong moth is a tiny fraction the volume of a grain of rice. Truly remarkable. And so it seems these animals are able to use a stellar compass, a magnetic compass, and I haven't gone into this in any detail, but temporary visual landmarks along the route, which they use together with a magnetic compass to find their inherited migratory direction, both towards these mountain caves during the during the spring, and away from the caves back to the breeding grounds during the autumn. So it's a really, truly remarkable and unique insect, the Australian bogong moth, not only because of its cultural connection to the first peoples of Australia, but also because it's a remarkable animal in its own right in terms of this quite incredible navigatory power it possesses. But, and this is what I want to end my talk with, you possibly heard you probably remember, maybe you've even got many of your relatives in Australia that were affected by these absolutely dreadful fires that we had in Australia. I said the worst bushfires here, but I realised that was an actual typo. It's the worst drought I meant to write here in Australian history, that lasted for 3 entire years between 2017 and 2020. And this culminated in the worst fires that we've ever experienced in Australia. This actually is what it looked like over our house, where I also have our lab in the Snowy Mountains in Australia on New Year's Eve in 2019. We were there, and my family were there. We were there for Christmas. We had to evacuate in high speed away from there. It was a very harrowing and disturbing experience, and we had to travel to Canberra to get away from this inferno. The alpine areas where the caves were, these areas were very, very heavily damaged by fires. I think about 70% of the alpine areas burned down during 2 or 3 days of fires around this time, around New Year's Eve 2019 and the first days of 2020. A completely harrowing experience, both for me personally, but also for our wonderful Bogong moths, because preceding this, if I just go back just to mention this drought that started in 2017, within 1 year, between 2017 and 2018, the winter breeding grounds were so dry and so hot that the larval stages didn't survive that period that they needed to survive in the winter time to make it through the pupae and to the adults. There was very little vegetation for the larvae to eat, and they were also competing with all the other herbivores that exist in these areas, like kangaroos, rabbits, every other type of animal, for this very, very scarce vegetation. So there was a dramatic population crash in the Bogong moth population of about 99.5%, we've estimated. And so this crash resulted in 4.5 billion moths entering the mountains, decreasing to almost none. In fact, those caves where millions of moths were housed the previous year housed effectively no moths. We saw none in the following year at all, which was highly, highly disturbing. The numbers this year have for the first time started to go up again, but we're still vastly depleted. We've had 2 years of heavy rainfall that have now resulted in some of the worst floods we've ever had in Australian history. Sadly, we've gone in the other direction, but this extra rain at least has meant that the breeding areas where the moths developed in the winter have received a lot more moisture and have recovered to some extent. So there is some hope, but nonetheless, unfortunately, this led to the Bogong moth being listed as endangered on the red list in 2021. And if somebody had said to me just 5 years ago that this would happen, I would just have laughed in their face, because this moth is so common, so widespread, and it's a wake-up call to realize that even such a creature, such a numerous animal, could suddenly end up in this endangered status across the period of a single year. And I think it's been a wake-up call to politicians and policymakers in Australia who are starting to realise that the Bogong moth, in addition to all of the other reasons why it's famous, has become a bit of a canary in the coal mine of climate change, if one could use that awful kind of wording. And things are starting to be done. I think people are waking up that we need to get off fossil fuels in Australia and start working out ways of increasing our reliance more on renewable energy. And I think, honestly, that's the biggest hope we have for the Bogong moth and many other species, actually, in the future in Australia. But with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And even though this is not a British moth, I hope nonetheless you find this moth as well a fascinating animal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely amazing talk. I mean, a bit harrowing towards the end. I'm very sorry to hear about your personal trauma in those horrendous droughts and fires, but also obviously the impact that it's had on the moth. But the research that you've done is just fabulous and fascinating, and there are loads of very positive comments in the chat about it. We have gone slightly over time, but I'm going to ask you one or two questions if that's okay. I mean, people are free to leave. That's another thing about online meetings, is that you don't have the embarrassment of getting up from the front row and walking out when it's time to go and get your train. There are a few talks that cover the same kind of area, and I guess it's about whether the moths, so you've shown that the moths have, you know, at least three, well, you've proved that they have three types of queue that they can use. And these questions are all around the sort of hierarchy of that. So there's a question about, you know, what happens if you keep the magnetic field correct, but flip the stars. There's a question around how they cope when they can't see the stars because of cloud, or as you've come towards the end of your talk, if the sky is completely obscured with smoke. You know, so do you have any feel for that sort of hierarchy and how the moths sort of, you know, can they just switch from one to the other, or is it a quite a complex thing?
Oh, look, these are absolutely fascinating questions, which are our future research questions, actually. So, no, these are really, really, really pertinent questions, and yeah, we're really keen to know how these two cues are actually integrated in the brain of the moth. So, what I haven't told you is that we're also recording from neurons in the central brain of the moth to try and understand how this stellar compass information is actually processed by the brain. And we've found whole networks of cells which seem to be involved in this. And we want to find out how magnetic information is both sensed, because that's not known in any animal either, how magnetic field is sensed, and how that is sensed and how that information is integrated together with the star information. So with the behavioral experiments like the ones I've just shown you, we've got the possibility, exactly as the members of the audience have sort of realized, that we can sort of manipulate both cues in ways that we can start to tease apart the importance that each cue has, so we can work out what the hierarchy of cues is. So there is a hierarchy probably where we think that the stars are probably the most prominent cue in the hierarchy, followed by the magnetic field, followed by visual cues. So if one of them gets obscured, like clouds blocking out the stars, then they just can default and drop back to the next cue in the hierarchy. So, and insects and all animals actually use every sensory cue they can get their hands on to do rather complex tasks more robustly and reliably. So yeah, but as you lose cues in the natural world, it gets more difficult, obviously. So yeah, no, these are questions we're really fascinated to find out more about ourselves, actually.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, there was another question about how the moths sense the Earth's magnetic field. So you've answered that as well. We don't know.
No, we don't. You know, we don't know. We don't know that in any animal, actually.
Right. That's great. The only other thing to say, Eric, is that there was a request for any links to any of the papers. I'm presuming you've published this amazing research in many places, I suspect. So if you have got a moment, just to put a link or two, or maybe a link to your university page that might have further links on it or something like that.
Sure.
In the Q&A, that would be absolutely brilliant. So
yeah.
Thank you.
How long will it be up now that the meeting is over? It's
well, not very long.
Okay. Maybe
I guess we can probably keep the meeting open for a few minutes, you know, after we officially stop, so people can check the Q&A and also fill in the evaluation form. But yeah, if you're able to do that fairly quickly, that would be wonderful.
Sure, that's yeah, absolutely, I can do that. I mean, COVID knocked us out. Well, first the drought, and then COVID knocked our research out for a few years. So we've only published the magnetic story. The star story is where we're finishing up to publish now. So that's not yet published, actually, but the magnetic compass story is published. So I can give the reference for that paper. It's available in Current Biology.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, I will just, we have gone slightly over time, but I'm sure no one will mind that, because it's been an absolutely amazing morning of talks, I think. Really inspiring. There are lots of great comments in the chat about how people have enjoyed all the talks and found it very inspiring and obviously informative as well. So I'm not going to waffle on amazingly. I'm just going to extend a huge thanks once again to everyone who's spoken in today's meeting, to Russel, to Emma, to Zoe, of course, to Jamie, Durwyn and Eric. Big thanks to Zoe, who organises the meeting, and to Denise, who's hiding behind the scenes, making sure it all runs smoothly, and who, with our admin team at head office, have organised the whole sort of process of the meeting, the Zoom part of it, and the bookings and all the rest of it. So, Zoe, could you put the link to the evaluation form into the chat one more time? Please, everyone, do complete the click on that link so you can open another window to fill in the evaluation form. I'm sure it won't take very long to do, a couple of minutes of your time. And I think that's it, really, unless have I missed anything, Zoe? Russell? No?
I don't think so. I'd just like to say thanks to everybody for coming along today, and thank you so much for the positive feedback received so far. I don't know, I'm feeling quite emotional because it's just been such a fantastic morning. So thank you all, and just remember, every moth record counts, and you know, without your efforts recording moths, we really couldn't do what we do. And let's face it, what we're here for, we're doing it because we love moths and we want moths to continue to thrive. And I just wish that we, as humanity, we were as intelligent as the Bogong moth.
The Bogong moth. Great, thanks, Zoe. Okay, well, with that, the meeting's been recorded, as you're aware, so there will be a recording of it made available in due course on Butterfly Conservation's YouTube channel. That usually takes a little while to sort out, but it will be there. And we'll advertise that fact when it's available, so you can go and tell everyone else to catch up with all these wonderful talks. Thanks again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Cheers all.